Dear actor friends, good morning. Thank you for being here so early after yesterday's party in Hopedown House, and for having chosen this session and not the one next door. We are going to talk about IP challenges in sports, and I would say that when we speak about IP to profanes, we always say that IP is everywhere. It is in the book we read, in the chair we are seated, in the lamp that is giving us light to read, in the drink we are having at that moment, in the music we hear, and in the device that is reproducing the music. But when we talk about IP and sports, this is even stronger. Football players have in their T-shirts many brands, not only the club's one, but sometimes the sponsors and another partner. The stadiums are filled with trademarks. Sometimes in the floor of a stadium there is a brand. The name of the team and the name of the stadium is sometimes branded, but not always there are these visible signs of IP, but also many others that are behind the scene. We have partnership agreements, sponsorship, licensing, merchandising, media and broadcast rights, and many controversies which are to be faced. Piracy, counterfeiting, ambush marketing, and problems related to the protection of event marks, ownership issues, limits to trademark rights. We are going to discuss today all these issues, which are visible and not visible, and we have the best team for it. We have a team of, let me show that, a team of 2 young women, specialist IP lawyers, and 2 young men, specialist IP and sports counsels. I am giving a brief presentation of them. To represent the event organizer point of view, we have Michael Short. She's a generalist IP lawyer working on the role as the sole IP practitioner at UEFA. He is from Edinburgh. He studied law here. He has a postgraduate studies in IP from the University of Oxford and in sports law from the De Montfort University. To show the point of view of the club, we have Anna Guix. She is an IP lawyer in Football Club Barcelona's legal department. She has a degree in law from the University of Barcelona. Then she has a postgraduate degree in intellectual property and competition law from ESADE, University Ramon Llull in Barcelona as well, and an advanced university course in mediation in civil and commercial matters from CEDECO, Universidad Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid. To defend the point of view of the sponsor, we have Stamatia Tzirossi. She is a brand enforcement attorney Europe at Red Bull in Austria. Stamatia is of Greek origin. She studied law in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece. And then she completed her studies in Germany, international studies in intellectual property law at the Technical University of Dresden, and also at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. And finally, we have David Gill. He's a chartered UK and European trademark attorney. He's partner and owner of Gill & Gill, an IP boutique based in London. He holds a degree from the University of Law of London and the University of St. Andrews, as well as a first-class master's degree in IP law from the University of London, Queen Mary. He worked at FIFA, and he continues advising FIFA as well as many other right holders in the field of sports, such as UEFA, FIBA, Formula One, America's Cup, and many others. So you are in very good hands. We have thought of a game distributed in 3 parts. The first part, we will talk about the signs, event marks and other marks. Then another part will be the controversies, piracy, counterfeiting, unfair competition, and also limits to trademark rights. And finally, the very necessary balance between marketing and legal. So now, the game starts.
bring the flavour.
Hi everyone. Obviously, an advert relating to one of our key competitions, the UEFA Champions League, and we put it in there just to show a quick example of some of the balancing acts that are required in the world of sport and IP. Now, they're not unique to sport. Image rights is not a solely sports issue. Obviously, sponsorship and licensing of trademarks is not a sports-only issue, but it does tend to hit the consumer hard. They tend to be high-value sponsorship agreements. They tend to be very famous individuals behind the image rights. The issues tend to be at the extreme when it comes to sport. We'll talk about a few of the issues that arise from that advert or within that advert throughout. We may refer back to it a couple of times. We're each sort of taking little sections. So the first section here on naming rights, we're sort of splitting up between us, given the fact we have a varied set of experts here. So I think Anna, first up on naming rights. That's it, yeah.
Okay, is it working? Yeah. Hello, good morning to you all, and thank you for the invitation and participating here, which is a pleasure. As Michael said, this advert illustrates a little bit what is the daily basis and routine that we are facing when we deal with all the intellectual property issues in the sports industry. As you saw, there are many implications there. You see image rights, sponsorship rights, competition rights. In this particular example, the club is not involved since it's a competition advertising. But when we see all these kind of creativities, even when it comes from a competition organizer or directly from a sponsor, which could be a sponsor of a competition or a player sponsor also, or a club sponsor, all the business colleagues that are working with us, and I think that in WIFA it must more or less happen the same, or also when you work in a sponsor or a brand, all the marketing people come to you and say, can they do that? Because they always think that all these kind of creativities could have some impact on your own creativity. So you need to keep control and keep an eye on what not only your competitors, but all the different agents who are participating in the sports industry are doing to see or to control that there is no affectation to your own rights or to your own projects. So you not only need to be aware of the general IP legislation, but also need to go to the sports regulations, which are quite vast, and they also regulate all the commercial rights and who can do each kind of uses. No? So I think that was a good starting point just to illustrate what are we facing on a daily basis. So to start with, already with the first point of the session in relation to the naming rights of events, teams, stadiums, etc., from a club perspective, which is the one that I am talking about, of course we do protect the name of the club, the logo, the crest, and then we have many different signs that are also registered and protected. Maybe in the last years, sports industry is becoming bigger and bigger, and clubs are also becoming or trying to become a bit more professional, and the concern about protection is more serious each day. So we do really try to protect the name and to identify which are the main brands of the club and of the team, and where should we put all the efforts in protecting. So we do really need to build strong strategies on that, to be clear. Trademark portfolios are becoming bigger, and that makes it difficult sometimes to control or to make them consistent. So one of the projects that we were facing, and then I think that now we are more or less keeping it controlled, was to make sure which were the brands that we really need to protect and which are the ones that maybe are secondary and do not need that big investment. In relation to event marks, of course, the club is not really concerned on them, but we can sometimes have interest in creating particular trademarks for particular events, maybe because we want to build a strong relationship or a close relationship with a sponsor in relation to that particular action, or because there can be some merchandising interests. So we really think of creating a new mark. As you know, all the marketing departments are always very creative. They create logos constantly, and they really are interested in protecting it. So when it comes that time, then we need to make sure, in relation to these particular event marks, that they are not too much descriptive, because otherwise they would have very weak protection. But we need to also balance what are the interests there, because if the sponsor is really interested in protecting that, or if there is a licensing program behind that, then we should really go for this registration, even though we also need to balance, is it going to be really worth doing to invest that time and that money, maybe when we have the trademark registered, because we cannot always work with all the advance that we would need, we need to consider whether it is really going to be worthy all the protection strategy. So when we consider about these marks, we need to be careful about the descriptiveness, for sure. And then we also face some problems in relation to the uses by third parties. For instance, think of a travel agency that is selling or offering their services, and they refer to this particular trademark that you have created because they are offering flights and accommodation services to assist or to attend this event. Would that be a limit? Should we attack these kind of uses? These are daily situations that we face, and these are the things that we would be discussing about today. So as per the events trademarks, I think that Michael would be the most adequate people.
Yeah, sure. Event naming rights is obviously a constant and major issue for us. It's especially important now. If you're a football fan in Europe, you'll probably be aware there's a lot of talk at the moment about restructuring of the European football leagues. And one surefire change is the introduction of another competition. So we currently have two competitions, the Champions League and the Europa League. And there is going to be a third one added to that. So we're doing a clearance process on that right now. Coming up with a fresh, new, interesting, protectable tournament name these days is not an easy task. I'm not envious of the marketing team having to come up with that. At the same time, it's not like we already have two that are fantastic examples in one sense. They suffer from descriptiveness issues or non-distinctiveness issues in some jurisdictions sometimes. The Champions League benefits from having years and years and years of goodwill and reputation and proof of such, and benefits from being from well-known status in certain places. Europa League, a little bit less so, but it's still registrable. We still have a Europa League word mark registration at the EU IPO. So coming up with something that fits in with that theme, but doesn't suffer from a lack of suitable protection is key. You have clocked, maybe by the way I've talked there already, that we do consider when dealing with naming rights of events, not always including the term UEFA. UEFA is included a lot of the time, but we also do hold trademark registrations for the event name on its own, and we think that's an important step. The event name operates as a trademark, in our opinion, and is used as such. So we have to consider that when we do new clearances as well, that they can stand on its own 2 feet and not just exist under a parent brand. The last point I would say on event marks is one thing that is beneficial perhaps in the sporting world, and something that's maybe unique in the sporting world, is the need for competition. Exclusivity is a phrase that's used a lot in sport, especially when in respect to sponsorship agreements or broadcasting agreements. But you don't live in a vacuum in sport. You need there to be interest in other sports. You need there to be interest in other areas of your sport to build a population base to be commercially viable. And what I mean by this is you don't want to quash competition in the industry of sport. So when you seek new developments and new names and so on, it's often in the interests of everybody to have some similarity of name or a similar style of branding or a similar style of brand identity. Sometimes you find that means people are slightly more willing to negotiate or settle or at least have discussions during opposition and clearance phases, because actually, although there may be a block in your trademark from pre-existing rights, they actually might quite want UEFA to suddenly launch a tournament that has a name that's roughly similar. It might almost be a PR benefit or a commercial benefit. So sometimes in sports, there's some teamwork, when perhaps all you hear usually is litigation and friction, but actually sometimes in sport there's teamwork to help with these clearance tasks. But you'll soon see, hopefully over the next few months, what me and my team have come up with, or not, in terms of inventive new name. On stadiums, I think I'm not the best person to comment.
Hi, everybody. Well, you're already all aware of the fact that there are stadiums all over the world named after the sponsors. Like we have the ISAP Arena, a lot of them. Then we have the Commerzbank Arena. And there is a lot of contractual relationship between the naming of these stadiums, because there are a lot of parties involved and a lot of legal sides involved as well, because we're talking not only about the naming rights of the stadium, but because most of the times this is an exclusive right which sponsors fight for, because then you will be associated with the venue of the events all the time, because they will say, I will attend the venue at the SAP Arena or Commerzbank Arena. So there is a lot of contractual tension in that sense. We have a Red Bull Arena in Salzburg, so there is a naming rights contract behind that. But apart from the naming of the stadiums, there is a lot of creativity behind the creation of logos and trademarks when two parties enter a cooperation or a sponsorship, or they decide just to work together. And at Red Bull, people are very creative. So there is a lot of creation of new logos or joint logos between the parties. And I would like to address this aspect from my perspective and how this affects or interferes with my daily work and what cases I feature, I advise on. There are a lot of constellations that one can encounter. The simplest one is you take IP from party A, like a registered trademark or an unregistered design or copyright, and IP from party B, and then you merge them together and you have a combined logo comprising of two elements, which in the end of the day, they're separated and you can see the separation. So in such cases, there is not much of discussion or room for discussion, because each party gets its own registrations and defends its own trademarks, gets the goodwill in these trademarks, and also is responsible for the enforcement and paying of the maintenance costs, etc. There are often, we try to cooperate with our partners with respect to enforcing our trademarks, with respect to combined logos, having our trademarks, and in practice it works very well. So we can have a partner, let's say we are the sponsor and there is a team, and if the team sees that the combined logo or one of their logos is infringed, then they will come to us and they say, okay, we will take care of it, or we will take care of the aspect that concerns our logo, and then you can take care of the aspect that concerns your logo, or we cooperate and fight it together. I think this is a relatively straightforward approach, because we have a clear separation between the IP rights concerned. Things tend to get more complicated when we have personal rights involved on one of the parties. So let's say we are the sponsor and we get an athlete, and we get to get a combined logo or a combined designation with our name and the athlete's name. So of course, personality rights under civil law cannot be waived, so we get to have the authorization of the athlete and regulate to which extent we can use his personality rights image to create, let's say, a cartoon or a caricature, or use his name. Also, for example, on our broadcasting channels or merchandise, or in this respect. The last part that I would like to address is the creation of a completely new term or a completely new logo where both parties have contributed to. Because let's say you can have a partnership and you want to build something from scratch without involving any previously registered or registered IP within the parties. And this is where things get even more complicated, because in the future, if you don't regulate this from scratch and if you don't advise business properly, 1 year after or some months after, they can be fighting over who created what in this logo. And they say, okay, but I did this, okay, but I did that. So we always advise that from the very beginning in the contract between the parties, there is a clear stipulation of who created what. So in such cases, we can have, let's say, co-ownership of a term or a logo and say, okay, we both own it in the whole territory for all classes. We can have a separation of classes. We can have a separation of countries. We can also say, okay, during the term, we can co-own, but after that, one party abandons its rights and the other party gets full ownership. One party gets exclusivity and sole ownership from the beginning. And depending on what decisions our business takes, then we have to also regulate contractually the aspects that are more administrative and logistically speaking. We have to say, okay, will we register? Who will cover the clearance? Which classes? Will we do merchandise? Does it make sense to do clearance? Who will be obliged to enforce? Who will carry the cost of the enforcement? But it's always very challenging to clear all these aspects with business, and because business is my client, but business negotiates with the partner, and it's very hard sometimes to find a common point. But we always advise that things have to be cleared in advance before they proceed to launching a project or going live with a logo on a video or on a product in the end. These were the aspects that I wanted to address with respect to creation of new logos, and now David will tell us how difficult it is in the end to get trademark protection from a trademark registry for this kind of signs.
So my point is about the event marks, and particularly the territory plus year event marks. So this affects the major events like the Olympics and the World Cup, but also the Euros, in that over many years there's built up a tradition where the tournament is known by the city name plus the year. So you think of the Olympics like Sydney 2000, or a World Cup like Germany 2006. And because this has been a long-standing, over many years tradition, the event owners are very concerned to register these trademarks so that they can sell them for licensing, for sponsorship, but also to prevent unauthorized traders from using them. And this wasn't really a problem for many years until the Germany 2006 World Cup, when FIFA had their trademarks challenged with cancellation actions, and it went through the German courts right up to the highest level, where it was decided that this country plus year mark was not registrable, it was descriptive. And FIFA's position was it doesn't describe the goods and services, but the court's position was no, it does. It describes a characteristic that it relates to some event in Germany in the year 2006. And from the result of that case, the EU IPO has changed its examination procedures, its examination guidelines, recently in 2017, and has made it a condition that the examiners must refuse a country plus year mark on the basis that it is descriptive of all goods and services. And the guidelines are there published, but it causes great concerns for particularly these major events, the Olympics, the World Cup, and the Euros. The office, EU IPO's argument is that you can, of course, overcome this provisional refusal on the basis of acquired distinctiveness. But of course, the problem is that the event owners do not use the same city for each event. You know, Sydney 2000 is not, evidence of Sydney 2000 doesn't help you when you want to register, say, Tokyo 2020. There has been an argument that, that the rights holders should be allowed to register on the basis of an acquired distinctiveness in a sequence of trademarks. So the mere fact that you have a quadrennial event every 4 years with a city plus a year, but this has not yet been accepted by the office, the EU IPO, but this is an example of one of the challenges for major events, because the Olympics will continue to use the city plus year designation as one of their key trademarks, so Tokyo 2020. But if they cannot get it registered, then you can imagine there'll be big problems, because in their sponsorship and licensing contracts, this is one of the trademarks which is granted for use. So problems, tensions. It's interesting from the rights holders' perspective that they look at other trademarks for events which do not receive objections. So, for example, London Marathon or Berlin Marathon have been registered by the EU IPO without evidence of acquired distinctiveness and as plain word marks. Also, the event organizers will look at other trademarks which have been accepted, like 1976 Berlin. Now, clearly, the examiner has allowed it because he's not aware of any event. It doesn't have any immediate resonance to him. Also, there's a Myology 2024, which is a conference by the Institute of Myology. So it seems that if the examiner is not aware of the event, then it is not descriptive. But if he is aware of the event, he raises the objection for all goods and services. And I think it's an example that major events face, is that they're so well known that there is almost an instinctive reaction from examiners, not just at the EU IPO, in many offices around the world, that they take an instinctive feeling that it shouldn't be registered. It should be somehow kept free. And that is an example maybe of a doctrine which has crept in to the EU practice from the German practice. But again, it's a contentious debate whether it exists, whether it has been accepted or not. And different versions of the examination guidelines can change over time.
Let's make it contentious then, David, shall we? It's a fantastic summary, and the reason I jumped in was the exact point on the interest, the public interest element to this, on the obligation, or it's the right thing to do to keep these things free for everyone to use, that everyone can host events in that country in that year, et cetera, that can then be overridden by the most powerful applicant who can then prove acquired distinctiveness. It seems illogical to me that if the basis is a right to keep free on public interest, then that should survive an acquired distinctiveness process as well. You shouldn't even be able to prove a secondary meaning, because it should be open for all. But as we've seen, acquired distinctiveness claims have worked in this area, but as David says, extremely hard to prove when events are transitional and move on quickly. I think the underlying rationale for this is the key thing that's difficult to understand. It's not, the effect is easy to understand. The guidelines get followed, and the guidelines are clear at the EUIPO, but they're also not clear at national level. You get different results at national offices than you do at the EUIPO. And then my last point on this is there's registrability, but then there's also use. In my opinion, you could have an area of law that is overlooked in this issue is the defence of descriptive use. And I feel that if the issue is, which I know we're talking about later on, so I won't discuss it too much, but the idea that that events, an event marks such as this with the locations and years need to be kept free for all to use. Well, the law already has an option for that under the trademark regulation and directive, descriptive use. If you're just simply describing the venue or the location of an event, even if the trademark exists on the register for that phrase, you should benefit from descriptive use if it satisfies the remainder of that exception, if it's for fair commercial practices and genuinely describing the location of an event. The issue is we and others don't use these in descriptive ways. We use it as a brand name. We use it as a trademark. And it generates use as a trademark, and it has inherent, in our opinion, value as a trademark. But I think the two regimes can live hand in hand beside each other. But i.e. ownership of the mark, and then still legitimate fair use, to use a controversial phrase, I guess, in the trademark world. But nobody agrees with me.
Okay, let's switch to the other part of the game. So, David, the floor is yours.
So here, the controversy about media and broadcast rights is that most of us know the broadcasting rights for big sports events are extremely valuable for that sports event. For the Olympics, for the World Cup, the value could be 60 to 80% of the entire revenue. So swamping sponsorship rights, merchandising rights, ticketing rights. So, and you'll see that, say, with the Premier League, it's incredibly valuable, and because through the open market, the rights holders, the event owners, can sell those broadcasting rights to the highest bidder. And we've seen that the value of these rights goes up and up each time they come up for renegotiation. Those rights are protected either through technological measures of decoding devices and password-protected encryption, but also by law with copyright in the broadcast, or in certain countries, if they don't allow copyright in the broadcast, it's still protected by copyright works that appear within the broadcast, and also with laws against circumventing the technological protection measures. And these are criminal offenses, so it's very, very strict and tough laws against undermining the broadcast rights. So rights holders have the ability to charge very high fees, and in recent years you've often seen the rights holders slicing the cake even further, so they divide up the broadcast rights between live broadcast, delayed broadcast, repeats, online, they might even sell it separately for onboard an aircraft or on a ship. So each time trying to get squeeze more and more revenue from that cake. Public broadcasters in many countries often find themselves priced out of the market by the satellite and cable channels. And so the end consumer, the man in the street or the woman in the street, often finds they cannot watch a particular major event, or they cannot watch their national team on their normal television set, and it's behind cable or satellite paywall. And this causes a lot of tension. It is fair to say it can be a very serious cultural issue in a particular country. If you think of countries that qualify for a major event either for the first time or very rarely, you think of Egypt in the last World Cup or Peru, the entire country wants to watch the national team on television. And I was in Egypt before the last World Cup, and they had heard that I was working for FIFA, and everyone kept asking me, what are you going to do about the broadcast rights? No one can afford to watch it on television. The prices are, and they were quoting the price just for the subscription was, the annual salary of a sort of normal worker. So you can understand that these then, particularly for, say, the national football team, become extremely sensitive cultural issues and not just IP. And market forces may not be the right method for pricing. So so a lot of countries have decided to pass regulations where they say for the national team for a certain sport, usually football, that the match has to be shown on free-to-air television. But then, of course, the question is, how far does that extend? Is it just the men's team? What about the women's team? What about under 21? What about a different sport? Is it just football? Should it be rugby? Should it be, any other sport? And also the tensions, there should be a balance. IP rights, obviously, it's a fundamental right. Say in the EU, we have a Charter of Fundamental Rights, and the protection of property is one, and it specifically mentions, as a subclause, intellectual property. But these fundamental rights should be balanced with others, such as the right of freedom of expression and information, but also the right to conduct a business. Small cafes, bars that rely on normally showing football matches or sports matches to their customers, they feel they're being priced out of the market, and they feel that this interferes with their right to do business. So you're looking here at the controversies. I'm not going to answer them, but it's almost, the cultural rights, there isn't a fundamental right known as cultural rights, but perhaps there should be. Perhaps there's something that someone might raise in the future.
I would like to add from a club perspective, I'm not going to extend a lot in relation to this point, but just to give you also another view or inform you about situations that we also face in relation to the media and the broadcast rights from a club perspective. Clubs are also interested in using the images of the matches and of the plays because we need to show the activity. That's our core business. And also our sponsors are interested in getting this kind of contents to create their creativities. So when all the media rights are exclusively granted to broadcasters, we sometimes face these situations where we are in the limit on whether are we infringing or not the rights. So we need to go to the competition regulations where all the media rights are regulated and see what rights are reserved to the clubs and also to the sponsors. What uses can we do? Can we show these contents through our social media, which nowadays are one of the most important channels of communication with the public? Can we only show them on our own TV? And not all the clubs do have their own TV. We fortunately do, but there are smaller clubs that do not. So there is really a controversy there also, which affects directly to our information and communication programs and the relationship that we want to have to do fan engagement. So this is also another issue that comes to us on a daily routine and basis. And yes, you see some uses, and again, all the marketing colleagues come to you. Can we use this, or our sponsor needs that? Do we really feel comfortable if we allow them to use this kind of content? Then you need to go and analyze what are exactly the rights that you really have and what would be the risks. So we need to balance there. So that was the issue I just wanted to add to this point because I think it was interesting to share it with you. The next point
Can I
is-
make one on
Yeah,
that? Is
sure.
that okay? From an organizer's point of view, there's been a couple of major developments, I guess, in the world of broadcasting recently. One an issue and one a solution. And the fairly well reported around the world, the be-in, be-out queue broadcasting tension that happened through in the Middle East, whereby basically a legitimate broadcaster's service was effectively copied and then distributed around the world for free by a competing company based out of a politically competing country. And what we saw there, we were affected, but many other sports brands were affected as well. We saw that the number of actors involved in the broadcasting world is huge, and that you lose control because of that. Yes, you make money because of that, but you also lose control. And there are technical, technological ways, dark ways in this industry that we are not ready for. That most sports organizers are not capable of being on top of. And that leads to potential breaches, potential piracy issues like this, and we are constantly chasing our tail. And we now have, there's actually a job advert out right now, if anyone's interested. I'm joining UEFA as a full-time anti-piracy lawyer. It's already something we do a lot of, but the fact that it's a constant issue for us isn't new, but it's actually getting worse rather than easier. One solution, my second point on this, is that there's a definite move towards over-the-top platforms. So direct from over-the-top refers to when it comes direct from the producer, direct from us. Netflix is an over-the-top service provider of films and documentaries and so on. Some sports organizers are doing that themselves. We've just launched ours, whereby we directly supply to the consumer and take out all the middlemen. And you can do it on your desktop, there's an app on your phone, and you get direct access to the content. And at least that way, UEFA is a bit more in control of the movements of the copyright works. And can intervene in the system if it gets abused. It's a little bit easier to do that. We only do it, obviously, alongside all of our other broadcasting deals. So it's only for, as David mentioned, all the different slices that are free. So the highlights that go after the game, or the full game, but a week after it happened. The various slices that are more publicly available and don't carry the same commercial weight. Or matches that are not very accessible in certain countries. If for some reason we haven't distributed it in that territory, then we can distribute it direct to the consumer now. It's something that's going to grow. And indeed, I read a report last week that allegedly the NBA, there's a lot more of this in America, a lot more direct over-the-top delivery of broadcast issues to consumers in America, that potentially 100% of their broadcasting will be done over the top by 2035. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but the fact that anyone's talking about it shows that in the broadcast world, maybe the number of actors involved might be about to be reduced, which would change the whole industry significantly.
Let's switch to merchandise rights, Anna.
Okay, so in relation to merchandise, you all know that in the sports industry, merchandise products are quite successful. So all the clubs need to have their merchandising strategies and policies. What we do from Football Club Barcelona, we do have a very big licensing project, and we do have licenses worldwide. The aim here, or the most the strongest task that we have here is to get control on what are the trademarks owned by the club that are really being used by our licensees, to gather all the evidence and to know exactly whether we have the proper protection in relation to all the goods and in relation to the territories and in relation to the trademarks that are really being used. as I told you before, we have recently done a project, and we have executed a project in order to try to organize our trademark portfolio, see which are the trademarks that really identify the club, the ones that are really engage our fans, and the ones that really have that commercial interest. And also in order to control exactly all the uses and how do we really take care of them. We also try to make, and we work this with all the marketing area, brand architecture, so that and brand manuals, try to develop brand manuals so that all the uses are consistency with our trademark strategies. Then we have to reflect that, and we have to write that down into all the agreements that we have with all our licensees. So one of the challenges here is to try to limit exactly what would be the trademarks that the licensees could be using in relation to different products, so that we can make sure that we have the proper registration. Sometimes we also need to register just for preventive purposes, even though if we're not going to use that trademark for that particular product in that territory, sometimes it's worth, or the licensees come to you and say, we still want you to protect it because we see that we have a lot of counterfeit products using your brand. And then we need to balance, can we rely on well-known trademarks which are not registered? Do they have protection in all the territories or not? So again, all the budget issues arise also. We see, do we have resources enough to get all this protection through registration? And we need to prioritize. I mean, we know we cannot protect everything, but we do have to cover and try to protect the interests of our licensees, who in the end are the ones who are using and representing our trademarks in many territories and in relation to a lot of different industries. I mean, the most successful products, of course, are the official kits of the club, the T-shirt and these kind of things, but there are a lot of many different products that also have their business and their market, and we also need to protect that. When it comes to enforcing the rights, as Tamatia said before, we need to strongly collaborate with our licensees. They are our eyes in the territories where we have no presence, physical presence there. So they are the ones who work as private investigators for us. They inform on what is the real situation in the markets, and then we can start building protection strategies if we don't have them developed in that particular area for those particular products. Then we also need to strongly and closely work with our trademark agents, because we explain them and they recommend us what would be the best strategy in order to obtain this strong protection. So, and we need to write that down into all these agreements. So that would be in terms of the merchandising rights. And then when we come to counterfeiting, we also need to provide our licensees all this brand indication of the application of the trademark. How should they use the trademark? What kind of security labels they should be using? That is also important for us to gather evidence of use. If we ever have a problem or a conflict, we will need to prove that we are properly using the brand as we have registered. So we need to explain our licensees and also to all our marketing colleagues what would be the usage that will be really helpful for us if we have to face any kind of conflicts like this. So we really need to share all this information. And when it comes to enforcement, all these indicators are also shared with the police and customs authorities so that they can also automatically identify fake products. We work closely with them, and if you build strong relationships and collaborative relationships with the authorities, they are all also very helpful, and they communicate and they take the initiative sometimes when they see products that could be fake or not, and if they have any question, they come to you, and then you need to work closely with all the product managers who need to understand exactly why we require their help and their assistance in order to enforce the brands. And counterfeiters, as you may already know, have sophisticated their practices, and they are doing copies which sometimes are very difficult to identify. That is why we need to examine all the products. We need to have these guidelines and all this information. And sometimes that is even more difficult when it comes on the online infringement. I mean, when products are sold online, you just have this photo of the product to identify whether it is original or not. We have these indicators, but sometimes we need to do test purchases in order to make sure whether the products are fake or not. And all these identifiers and all these indicators that come from the marketing area, and they explain to you, no, the crest has not been used properly here. That's a clear identifier that the product is not original.
Thank you. Do you want to add something to that issue? No? So we go to the following point on the technical problem.
Yeah, sure, okay. What I wanted to do here was focus to really give you some genuinely tangible things about the sports industry, and nothing generic, about what makes it, what elements are more difficult perhaps than other industries. Why is it a problem? Why do we talk about it? Why do we have to find solutions to it compared to any other industry? And I'm not claiming these issues are unique, but they are at least particular and highly prioritized in the football world, in my opinion, when it comes to enforcing the rights. First, everybody thinks that when we do on-site enforcement, removing counterfeit products and looking after and trying to prevent ambush marketing, then we're just talking about the stadium where the sport is played, which isn't true. The issue is that we take over, and sports organizations like us take over a city at times, take over large sections of a city when this event comes into town. And we then create things like fan festivals, which are often in a major city center area where you don't have the same ability to control street selling and the other brands that might be exposed around that area. So I'm going to list a few other areas, but what's the technical problem? The technical problem is you have to have feet on the ground. You have to actually have people willing to do it and able to help with the enforcement. And you need local authority support to do that. But when you spread yourself over a whole city, it's extremely difficult compared to perhaps just outside of, focusing on a shopping center where your products are sold, or just at the border if you're importing, or if it's a concert, it's just outside the concert venue. But for us, it's across the whole city, and it's very difficult to have enough people to actually go and find the issues and then be able to advise local authorities to support. Another weird thing about football is that the fans don't like each other very much. So you've got to split them up. So what we do these things called fan walks or fan meeting points, where when spectators come to the city, we actually put them in locations as far away from each other as possible in the city, and they gather there, and then they walk or find another form of transport to the stadium. So once again, you're covering the whole city, and it's obviously a very, very engaged marketplace of thousands and thousands of people all looking for product or for food and drink or for a very attentive clientele. And they're at two different ends of the city, and they're moving targets. So it's not an easy task, and one that's relatively unique to football. A second one is that, so I just did the Nations League, the event in Portugal. I was there, and there were not a huge number of issues. But I came away from it thinking, who sponsored this event? And I can say this because we don't have a beer sponsor for national team football affecting this competition. And I came out of it, who came out of that tournament thinking who was involved in that event and who got benefit from that event? And the obvious answer, the completely obvious answer, was Superboc. And I thought, well, why did Superboc? They're not a sponsor of ours. And so it was because there were 50,000 Englishmen drinking it on the streets for 7 days. And the product was lying across the floor, and it was across the city, and it was outside every bar, and there's boxes of it sitting in every park. And you think, well, you know, it's the ultimate form of ambush is just to be a good product. It's the best form of sponsorship in the world. And yet, obviously, if you try and enforce and protect the use of your trademark rights exclusively with a particular product sponsor, you would want to try and keep the publicity of other competing products a little bit quieter than that. There's no misuse of any marks or anything, but you know, it's very difficult to police our rights when we operate in consumer products, as in we operate with sponsorships with consumer products, especially when you go across borders and the product that your key sponsor might not even actually sell that product. For example, Alipay is another big sponsor of ours, and they don't operate in many European countries. So finding ways to police the use of our marks by their competitors is a little bit tricky because they don't even have a presence to protect. One last one is some oddities about sport and tools of the trade. We refer to so boots, technically tools of the trade. In football, you don't really. There's still sponsorship agreements between players and boots, but you basically can't infringe in any way. You can't restrict the use of different brands of boots and all these sort of things. And it's potentially starting to expand. So one thing we have is there's obviously lots of kit sponsorship agreements and exclusivity deals with kit. And what we've found recently is that there's another area of a tool of the trade, which is socks. And we see a lot of players these days playing in a particular sock type, which I won't name, because it's very good. And what they do is they deliberately breach their the regulations or their own sponsorship agreements to be able to wear these socks. And they'll sometimes cut the bottom of the sock off that they have to wear and stick their other sock on and then tape around it or sew it up or whatever. But the exclusivity that's been paid for by the kit manufacturer, which isn't being paid to us, it's being paid to the clubs. So maybe I shouldn't be talking about this. But is breached, and we at national team football, where we are involved and we have major sponsors looking to protect their involvement with our national teams, players still do it there. So at the World Cup, for example, I can say this because it wasn't us, but FIFA fined these players for wearing these socks and for the brand of that sock being visible on the field. And they fined them a large amount of money. Well, a large amount of money for us, but not for them. We don't do that. It's technically a breach of our regulations, but it's very difficult for us to ethically do anything about it. But an interesting area whereby everybody talks about it being very restrictive in football, but sometimes actually there's areas where something else needs to prevail, and actually just comfortable feet is apparently one of them. So yeah, there were 3 examples of specific technical issues or difficulties rights holders have in the world of football.
I mean, you cannot compete with beer when it comes to football. So, I mean, you cannot tackle that. But what I wanted to add with this respect is that some countries make the on-site enforcement very hard because they have procedural rules that, well, in the end, essentially, it makes it impossible to fight back counterfeiters. These are straightforward cases of trademark infringement, and some countries just don't help you enforce your rights because it's too complicated to confiscate the goods on site. And even if you do, then it will take years until the persons who were behind the infringement are punished for this financially or through any other reason.
You're totally right. It can take hours. It can take hours to do a seizure of one stall of products. Hours, and you have to have somebody there waiting with them the whole time. So you're right. It makes it very difficult.
But my further point would be the limits of trademark rights, because of course clear counterfeit cases is something that you can tackle on all bases, online, on site. I mean, if the enforcing authorities help you. But as we already all know, trademark rights have limitations, and I would like to address 3 of them. This is private use, descriptive use, and freedom of speech. well, it seems that Red Bull is a very popular sponsor because we have a lot of private persons who just decide to brand their cars or their sports equipment and just run in public, driving them or wearing these caps. Of course, this is private use and cannot be tackled, but it's something that annoys our business from time to time. Then we have fans of our own teams because we are owners of motorsports teams or the teams that we sponsor, our athletes, our events. They just come up with the idea, okay, we are like a group of 10 people and we are a fan of Red Bull, let's create our own Red Bull merchandise to wear it for ourselves. You cannot fight that either. Then you have people who wear counterfeit goods, which are obvious counterfeit infringements, trademark infringements, I'm sorry, on your own events, or post them on official, tagging your official Facebook pages or social media. This you cannot tackle as well, because it's again a private use, they don't offer it in commerce. So we try to explain to our business that whilst this is a use in public, so it happens in front of other people, it's not a use in commerce because it happens by private persons. And this is something that it's very, very hard to tackle. Well, our business is always happy with this response. But we try to explain to them that there are cases that you cannot just fight because they're not entities that operate in commerce. But I would like to address some exceptions or borderline cases, I would like to name them. For example, we had private persons who did that extensive use of our trademarks in their social media channels that they created the impression to the viewers or the people who followed them that they were actually sponsored by us. So this would be a good ground to argue that, okay, it's not used in commerce per se because they're not offering something, but they create the impression that they are associated with us in the sense that we pay them a sponsorship fee. So in these cases, okay, they're case-by-case cases that we have to look into and decide together with our business how we're going to approach them. Sometimes we address the persons. If they're not cooperative, we just address the social media providers. As most of the people here know, that social media providers are unwilling most of the times to take down accounts if you don't have a court order. So even though it's obvious that it's a counterfeit or the whole use is abusive, it's very, very hard to address this issue. With respect to descriptive use, simple examples are fan pages of teams, events of our athletes, which we own or sponsor. And you just have people who are there showing their enthusiasm and devotion by just creating a Facebook page or a web page, including references to our name or using the logos of our events or of our teams, sometimes showing enthusiasm, sometimes criticizing, but always in a descriptive manner. And another example is our business partners that we use to create our athletes' equipment. So let's say we have an athlete that is doing snowboard, so we instruct a snowboard company to create a snowboard board and put the Red Bull trademarks on it. So this partner does this not only for us, but for other companies, and then they decide to put this on their website or social media under portfolio. This is also descriptive, and we cannot do anything about this as well if there is no other contractual agreement on the background. There are often times that there are no such agreements because our business sometimes very quickly. But borderline cases of the above, as Anna said in the beginning, are the ticket providers for events or companies that host tours, allegedly like showing you where this Red Bull event took place, or drive the road that the MotoGP drivers had to go through, or I don't know what kind of other events do we have, motocross. So they invite people to join them on a tour that will take them to the same road that all these athletes that we sponsored did. For me, this is also a borderline case because they made obvious profit by using our trademarks, in particular by events that we organize and sell tickets. But depending on jurisdiction, we have problems enforcing, because it can be that if the jurisdiction is lenient, they would consider it as a descriptive use of the event as such, and not as an infringement to our logo. And with respect to the example I mentioned about the business partners, we also have faced some cases where it was not obvious the way the business partners posted their portfolio examples, that these goods were not for sale, but they were exclusively made for us in our name and for our athletes. So to our greatest surprise, we sometimes find out that on public comments like, is this item for sale? And then the response from the partner, send me a personal message. So for me, this is alluring to the fact that maybe this business partner is doing merchandise without having a trademark license agreement. And the last limitation is freedom of expression, which we all know it's a constitutional right. So it's very, very hard to fight against this, and we don't want in any case. So examples of such use are the use of our trademarks or our references in web pages, blogs, or sports media, sports-related web pages, reporting the outcome of a game, or reporting which athlete came to our sponsors, sponsorees portfolio, or celebrating a win, or criticizing a big loss, or commenting on the fact that we qualified or not qualified. So this is they can do that, of course. Another descriptive use would be a use in a historical context, so somebody reporting about something that happened in the past, using also trademarks or logos that I talked in the first section of my presentation, that maybe the partner and we decided to abandon. So we agreed on the fact that this logo should not be used again, and then somebody comes up and uses this logo again. You cannot fight that as well if it's descriptive. Borderline cases with respect to these two examples is a hidden advertising function, sometimes in reports from journalists. So you have a lot of sports websites where you have pay-per-click function. I don't know if you know that. So you click on the link, and the person who is operating the website gets money for each click he gets. So the use of our trademarks or FC Barcelona trademarks contributes to the fact that the reader will click on that link, so the person operating will make profit out of it. So for me, this is a use in commerce that you can address, even though that you have freedom of speech also within the website reporting the event. And last but not least, the use in historical context can also be abused from time to time if your ex-partner does not clearly state that the partnership or cooperation is over, but creates the impression that this is still running. So this is also taking commercial advantage of the trademarks of the other party.
Thank you very much. Now by way of awakening you, and the game continues with the third part, the balance. It is to address the balance needed between marketing and legal departments of the different stakeholders.
This is my section, but I wanted to very quickly make a comment on all the limits of the use, and then sort of link into that video a tiny bit of we've got a job to do in the sports industry to not be seen as the bad guys when it comes to this. And you've already, Red Bull, a very proactive and well-resourced and well-funded, company that's all over the place, and UEFA, similar, tend to get, will be seen to be very, very aggressive in this area, when in fact we're perfectly aware of the limitations of the law and also the ethics of, especially online, about what to do and what not to do, and where to take action and where not to. I think sometimes, as per David's comment at the start about registrability, I think sometimes there's an attitude in the industry of don't give these guys too much power, don't give these guys too many rights because they're going to abuse it. When in fact we don't and we won't, and we align with the same limits as everybody else. That actually, maybe it sounds like a sales pitch rather than just a truth, but it's perhaps in the past legal departments in these areas haven't necessarily been as big or as well organized as they are now, and perhaps some of the issues in the past were created by over pushing commercial arms rather than lawyers. And I think it's nice to know, it's nice to see that there's some sensible lawyering going on in big brands. And yeah, that was it. Maybe not always sensible lawyering, but sometimes.
We try to.
Try.
So also related to all this last part of the session, one of the main challenges, at least in my personal experience, that I faced when I joined Football Club Barcelona 3.5 years ago, was to try to explain all these kind of topics to the marketing and to the business colleagues in the club. As I mentioned at the very beginning, and as Michael was saying right now, sports industry is growing and it's becoming or trying to become more professional in terms of internal organization. So one of the challenges that we have as IP lawyers in this kind of organization is to explain and to train our colleagues in order to really understand what a trademark is. I mean, they do know that they have a very powerful brand. They do know that their brand needs to be protected, and they make lots of creativities and advertising to make or to build brand awareness, such as this last advertising that we were seeing, where you want to transmit the values of the club or of the competition or of the company, because we want to engage our supporters through these values. We want us to get them identified with this, which is the task that all the marketing people are doing daily, and I think that they are really doing great. But then there's the other side. They need to understand what a trademark is in legal terms. What does it mean when you register a trademark? What obligations do you have when you obtain this trademark registration? Because I don't know if that happens to you, but at Football Club Barcelona, we have a lot of great creative colleagues who are constantly changing the logos of a same project. So they come to you and they say, hey, we need to protect this because we have created that. This is going to be one of the most important projects this year. Okay, we start studying, we analyze, what are we going to use it for? We don't really know. What? Are you going to identify services? Are you going to do merchandising products? We don't know yet, but this is going to be one of the main projects of the year. Okay.
I get that with slogans. We get a lot of slogan stuff, and the slogan comes through, can we protect this? And say, yeah, what are you going to use it for? It's the name, and then they say, it's the name of the presentation. Yeah. That's all it is. It's literally the top line of the presentation.
Yeah, we are doing a report, and we're going to share it internally.
Yeah.
Why do you want to protect that? So the trademark function, I mean, you use a trademark to identify yourself in the market and to differentiate from your competitors. And if they don't understand that, that's why they come to you with the concern of registering everything they create, even though if it's for internal purposes. So that has been one of the challenges and still is. We do training sessions, and I think that in these last years, some of these messages have finally made their effect, because I have now some colleagues who come to us and say, okay, we have this logo, and we understand that we cannot variate it, and we understand that we need to gather all the proof evidence, because otherwise we will not be able to to enforce our rights, or also they need to understand that if you register the trademark, it's because you really want to use it. Otherwise, you can face lapse problems or lapse situations of the trademarks. So some of the responsibles of this come already to us and say, okay, we understand that we need to use it, so we are thinking of this kind of uses. Would that be enough or not? So communication between the legal and the business area is crucial here to really build a consistent strategy, not only from the marketing or the business side, but also on the legal side, so that you really have a strong trademark in use.
Thank you.
Do you have the issue, does anybody have the issue of people, internal marketing teams, using photography from well-known websites, pay for the photo?
Like Getty Images.
Yeah, exactly. And then believing you can do anything you want with it and put it everywhere you want, and et cetera, et cetera.
Or they say, I have a Creative Commons license. Okay, did you go to the details of that Creative Commons license? Do you know exactly what are the permitted uses?
Yeah,
we also face this.
Yeah, that's a massive one for us, just because of the amount of content that goes out. And for one major one that happens with us is not only is there the licensing issue from the website, sometimes they actually read it, and that's nice, but then they usually don't consider some of the inbuilt consents and further licenses that may be required. We use a lot of buildings, for example, in a lot of our branding materials that then sometimes have some cultural heritage rights attached to them, or perhaps even architectural rights vesting therein. Sometimes we use sculptures and things like that, which sometimes are protected under cultural law in a few European countries.
You need then to check whether in those countries the freedom of panorama applies.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Not, so.
Yeah, but then it becomes an individual analysis of every photo, which is it's not very fun when you're a one-man IP department.
No, but it generally makes you also an unfavorable person within the company. So you're very... Well, let's say people don't like legal.
They don't want to come to legal because you will always raise the problem.
Yeah,
no?
but then they have to make a contract, so they have to come to me, and then I'm becoming less popular even when I tell them, okay, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you have to regulate this, yes, but we don't know, and I say, okay, do you know which party is going to which trademarks? Not yet. Okay, shall they be able to use our trademarks? Maybe. Which trademarks? I don't know. Will there be an event mark? We don't know yet. We're working on that. So they come very, very early, so we don't have the information. We try to educate them and point them to the correct direction so that they provide us the right information to regulate all these aspects that I address in the first part of my contract, so we don't have the problems afterwards. The main challenge is in building a contract, and I'm mainly working with sponsorship contracts and trademark license agreements. It's to balance the interests and aims that business wants to achieve via this contract by mitigating, because you can never exclude the legal risk, by mitigating the risks that can arise in the future. And this is the big challenge. So depending on what kind of sponsorship we have, because I saw sponsorship agreements from both sides, because we own teams, but we also sponsor teams. We do our own events, but we also sponsor events. So depending on if we're talking about an event sponsorship, a venue stadium rights sponsorship and naming agreement, as we said, a team sponsorship or an athlete sponsorship, the new upcoming trend is esports. I don't know if you face this issue. So esports agreements are a bit different than the classic sports sponsorships, because you have the digital aspect that you also have to address in some sense and try to see or foresee what other problems could arise in terms of this agreement, because it's a very, very new area now, and we don't know to which way it will develop, so you just try to save whatever you can save now. What I always ask businesses, I said, okay, do we need or do we give exclusivity? Most of the times the answer is no, or we don't know, or yes. So then you have to check if you already have an agreement in place or business did an agreement that you are not aware, already giving these rights exclusively to another partner, and then you cannot give them. Because business normally does not check that aspect by themselves. It's not their piece of cake, let's say, but they have to inform us if they do. And most of the times they do, but not always. Then you have to ask them who gets the right to use. Will it be mutual? Will only the partner be using? Will only we be using our affiliates? Sub-licensees, who has the right? We try to regulate the extent of use as much as possible so we don't lose control of the use of our trademarks. But sometimes our business is very generous. I think that marketing is also very generous and say everybody can use. And we say, no, we have to know who is using because then we can control unauthorized uses. But if you give to everybody, you cannot control who is using unauthorized. Then we're asking them, where will they be using? Online. And you say, okay, online does not help a lot, but it is a fact. Nowadays, everybody is using online, which means essentially they're using worldwide, because you cannot geographically limit the extent an online post or a website will reach. So in the end, you also have to see, okay, where will the event take place? So where will I have most visibility and assure that there I get the right warranties, clearances, and see in case we face a problem how this is going to be regulated. We generally advise that the duration of the use should be in line with the duration of the use of the trademark should be in line of the use, the duration of the use of the duration of the contract as such. So it doesn't make sense to give use to somebody perpetually. But our business does not understand what perpetually means. So I have to tell them, okay, if the contract expires, they want to keep using our trademarks, which is not correct because they will create the association. Then we try to find a common ground on this, and generally we define the use of the trademark to be in line with the duration of the contract. Sometimes we have to address issues like, will we be able to produce merchandise or do can activations? Because sometimes we do activations with our cans with the entities or athletes we sponsor. So we have to make sure to get these rights. We need to inform business that, okay, in case we do activation with the products, we need to have sell-off period because, okay, you have the contract with an athlete for 1 year, but then you may have the can with an expiration date of 1.5 years or 2 years. So we have to get this right as well. Otherwise, we have a problem with our core business, which is the can. Generally, we have aligned or trademark guidelines which apply to our partners, so this is not a problem. We define the enforcement aspect, which I said it has to be a cooperation between us and the partner, so that we can make the attacks together or at least align before doing them. And we always tell to a business to inform the partner that we need assurances of the trademarks that he's giving us and indemnifications, because we will be using something that is not our own and we cannot know what's happening there. So this is also very hard for business to understand because, as Michael said before, there are some partners that are, I mean, we are international, so most of our partners are international, but you may have one entity that is very popular in one country or only in Europe, and then he sponsors your motorsports events or your motorsports team in 8 countries worldwide. And, well, maybe in South America, the situation is completely different, and they don't have trademark use, but then in the sponsorship agreement, you oblige yourself to put this trademark on your Formula One car. So we need also to get, for example, we point out to business, do you want to do merchandise with the cars? Yes. Okay, then you have to explain to the partner that he has to give us also the right not only to use the trademarks on our webpage or in the events or on the car as such, but also to replicas of the car, because he will have more visibility like that. Most of the partners understand it, but business sometimes fails to get the information we need or explain this properly to the partners. So it is very challenging. But I think that if a lawyer tries, or let's say is successful in explaining to the business sides in a very simple way the impact that when you don't have this information will have to your project, then most of the times the result is positive. So you have to tell them, if we don't do this, this will happen. And then it works.
You said something which is funny for me, because you said that they come to you very early when they do not have the information. In our case, sometimes they come too late, when they are the business.
The day after the launch.
Yeah. We need the agreement, okay, but you're already doing it, so what do you want to negotiate now? No? So we also face this kind of situation.
I'm closer to you, unfortunately. Maybe it's a football thing. They're too busy playing football and not coming to us early. We had one interesting one, an odd one recently, really small example. You talked about territoriality and sponsorship agreements. We offer in all of our agreements, obviously, or most of our agreements, the right to use our trademarks as AdWords, as Google AdWords. We found out recently that you can't restrict the territoriality of the posts or the adverts. Maybe everybody knew this. I didn't know this. So we, for example, have hospitality contracts with a wide range of different people who all have territorially restricted ability to approach potential customers. We split up by territory, and each company obviously wants to use our trademarks as Google AdWords for their hospitality packages to pop up as an advert on Google. But what we can't do in any way is actually restrict the UK guys and the German guys. When we say yes, you can use our AdWords, we can't restrict it to adverts only to UK or Germany. But it has to be an open forum. It has to be a carte blanche. Which then makes it a little bit tricky to actually, it undermines the agreement a bit, because obviously they're still contractually obligated to not proactively sell into those territories. But one of the major ways you'd have to stop it, you can't do anything about. Just one odd little thing from recent times.
Thank you. Now the last bullet. The chair is yours, David.
Do you want to go to questions? I'm happy to.
No. I think we have 10 minutes.
So the last point was the balance between the rights holders and the commercial affiliates, meaning like the sponsors and licensees. That often you find there's a vicious circle, or there's sort of competing objectives. So the rights holder, whether that's the event, the league, or the club, registers its marks and licenses those to its sponsors, licensees, broadcasters, or maybe for events to a host city or to a host country. And they have different objectives. They want to use those marks. They want to use them creatively to engage with the public on, say, new media. And often you have this tension, particularly from the legal departments of the rights holder. We always advise the rights holder the mark should be used consistently. You shouldn't allow your design teams to mess around with it. The rights holders give their sponsors and licensees a big brand manual which has all the rules and regulations. You've all seen them. You've all worked with them. But of course, the sponsors, particularly new sponsors of a team or event, are very excited to exploit their new rights package, and the design teams want to take the marks and use them very creatively. And of course, as we've mentioned earlier, the legal teams are always saying, no, you can't do that, no, you mustn't. And the sponsors turn around quite often and say, look, we've spent this amount of money and we want to do X and Y, and you're telling us we can't. What's going on? And there's no solution to this. The problem, of course, when the rights holders, sometimes they will allow certain creativity. You see on the perimeter boards of major events, the old-fashioned way of just putting the event logo and then the sponsor logo next door to each other in a little box. Sometimes they merge with that, they allow creativity. We saw that on the Lay's example before, but it's a solution that really can't be found. You often find the rights holders want to use a popular term, like a nickname for a tournament, and that popular term might not be registered. It might be something which has been just grown up through sort of public use. And the rights holder will say, no, you must use the correct event title, maybe with a TM or with an R symbol next to it. And the sponsors say, yeah, but no one uses that. We want to use what the popular term, the local translation. And of course, then you have a problem if the sponsors are all using a term which isn't registered and not registrable. That sort of feeds the popularity of that term. And then they come to the rights holder and say, look at all these counterfeit products, or my competitors are using the same term. So, the rights holder can't do anything about it if it's not a registered trademark. So you often find these tensions within the relationship with the rights holder and the sponsors or the city or the country.
Yeah, it's a very good point that we deal with on a very regular basis. Indeed, you mentioned local translations, because we worked on one in China recently where the Chinese translation of the Euros, or what we were referring to at the time of Euro 2020, the English version of it was the Euro Cup, or was it even maybe just European Cup? It was a translation that, to an English phrase that we would never authorize, because it's an easy ambush use that would avoid our registered rights. But that was the only way that anybody in the Chinese marketplace referred to the competition. So we've sort of accidentally validated that phrase, but that's the only option we had, or else all the sponsors were refusing to use our one, because Euro 2020 would have, I think, meant Europe, the continent, and and it just wouldn't have come across properly, apparently, in the advertising materials. Could we pop back to the Lay's video? You mentioned the Lay's video just as the last point. That one there, yeah. Can we play it and then just leave the last?
I don't know why it doesn't work. Now.
Lay's, bring the flavour.
Does it pause there? Okay, so there's 3 points I wanted to make. One, the Champions League anthem, which is played there. Oh no, sorry. Can we hold on the last screen? Sorry. Could we stay on the visual of the?
On the visual?
Yeah, just on the end of the video. Sorry. Can we play it again? But I'll just talk over it. I won't make you wait again. I just wanted to point something out on the visual. So the Champions League anthem is based off just a piece of classical music, right? We own some rights in it, but we don't own all the rights in it because it's a derived work. It's very easy for any third party to use the original bit of classical music rather than our version of it, and there's no copyright infringement, and there's an easy association. Indeed, a recent advert involving Peter Crouch and a well-known phone company, Warehouse. His phone went off, and it was in the advert, and it's the music, but it's not our music. It's the original bit of classical, but everybody knows exactly what it is as soon as you attach it to a footballer. So that's a piece of the sort of the balance flows very much in favor of the commercial affiliates in that sense, because we don't even have control over it. In this one here, on this visual, so the star ball at the very top right that you can see there will not have been approved during the course of this, most likely. Luckily, it was before my time. It's primarily because, yes, we do protect the star ball as per the logo that's at the bottom left, But we don't own circles and stars. We don't purport to own every form of a circle and a star, or balls that may contain some stars on them. So it's very easy for folk to work around our trademark registrations and use something rather similar. Indeed, all the image websites, you can download stuff that's very, very close, but far enough away from ours to be okay. So we try not to have our own official partners do it too, integrate it into backgrounds or integrate it into other designs, because then it just makes the knockoffs or the ambushes look even more legitimate. So that's something we would have tried to stop in this instance, and obviously it didn't. Also, proud partner at the bottom left, I checked this morning, and it isn't a designation that's formally approved in the contract, and it may have been approved on a one-off. But obviously, proud partner, it's a phrase that we'd have no ability to prevent anybody else using. Obviously, it's meant to link to the Champions League because the Champions League logo is above it. But as a designation, it's not exactly the strongest designation in the world to stop other people using it. So we see, even with close partners, that sometimes during the design process, things can sometimes go awry.
Well, thank you very much. You have seen we have a panel that has self-control of the time, so we are perfectly on time. I would like to congratulate them because they have been brilliant, so we can applaud them. And we now have time for questions. If somebody wants to ask something, yes, please.
Thank you. My question is for Anna, actually. We know that names of individual players, football players, are powerful brands on their own. And today we saw, for example, Messi several times. So my question is really, how do you balance the relationship within the club between individual rights of players, their freedom to enter into contracts, and the rights of the football club? And what happens, for example, if the player just goes to another club, like, I don't know, Neymar goes to Paris? Thank you.
Thanks. That is really one of the crucial issues in the club. This is something that we try to regulate with the players in their agreement with the club. We do try to regulate all about the image rights of the players, but as you all know and as you can see daily, we can, and I think that this is the most spread practice amongst all the sports teams, where the club usually owns the image of the player when they are dressed up on the sports, on the club kit, okay? So when they are really closely associated and representing the club, that collective image of the player. But then you cannot avoid that they can handle their own business with their particular or their private image. And then it comes to all these contractual negotiation and clauses where you need to avoid all the ambush marketing situations that Michael was talking about before, and trying to protect also the sponsors of the club before all the activities or the business actions that players can manage or handle themselves when they are exploiting their private image, which is not an easy question, and which becomes in a lot of conflicts and phone calls and sometimes angry sponsors who say, look what our competitor is doing with your players. They are maybe not mentioning the club, but they are really getting this association through the player, which is not an easy task for us, because you also need to balance and to keep good relationship with all of them. I mean, players are the main asset of the club, then it would come the trademark maybe. So sometimes they are even more important than the brands, but you also need to have very good relationship and to protect your sponsors. So This is something you can never protect or prevent all the situations that can happen in one agreement, but you really need to think of all the possible scenarios and try to keep the balance on that, which is not an easy because, times change and they invent new practices and new creativities, which then you need to negotiate a lot in relation to these kind of things. Sure.
And another complexity is when teams go to tournaments, so events, and often the event owners are protecting their own sponsors. And some events have even banned the players from exercising their individual sponsorship rights for the duration of the tournament. Thinking particularly the Cricket World Cup in 2003, I think, in the West Indies, or certainly the West Indies, the Indian team, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but they went on strike or threatened to go on strike before the tournament because the rules of the tournament were that they could not exercise their sponsorship rights during the month of the tournament. And so the sponsors of the players who were paying them probably the most highest part of their revenue came from those deals. They put pressure on the players to then threaten to go on strike. And I think the organizing of the World Cup cricket backed down and they changed the event participation agreement. But you can see how they try and regulate that through the participation agreement. If you want to turn up and play in our tournament, you have to abide by our rules. So, which could overlay existing sponsorship deals with the teams, the clubs, and the individuals.
We saw even this week the infamous Rule 40 IOC announcement of some changes to all of that. So we'll see slightly more flexibility around individual players exercising their own sponsorship rights at the Olympics, where obviously there's no participation fees for competing compared to football or cricket, where at least they're getting paid sometimes a lot of money. But so that'll be an intriguing one to watch develop, because obviously the IOC were pretty strict in that position up until now, and there now appears to be movement, so we shall see.
Someone else? Yes, please. Micro there. Here.
Is this on?
Yep, can hear you.
Just a question about copyright. I haven't heard it mentioned, but a lot of logos must be capable of protection through copyright. And I'm just wondering how important that is, because I don't think I've heard it mentioned.
It's a good point. We haven't discussed it much. We've had some trials and tribulations with copyright registrations in our days with certain elements of our logos, where registration is required. In the US, for example, we've had some negative decisions in relation to trophies that are involved in our logos, and also core elements of our logo. So we do try to sort of solidify our rights when it comes to copyright in the logos where we can. We don't enforce much on it. We do find, probably to summarize into one point, that the place where we use it the most is online, when we do online enforcement. Online enforcement is often made easier when you can show a decent paper trail on copyright ownership of the assets. And because obviously online use sometimes is not trademark use, and you can get into that battle quite easily. If you can show a good ownership, if you can show good ownership paperwork on copyright, you tend to win the argument pretty quickly.
And of course, copyright is very important for the broadcast protection. And there is a controversy that the UK certainly doesn't recognize copyright in the broadcast itself, whereas other countries like the US, clearly they think there's enough creativity from the directors who are choosing which camera to curating the broadcast by choosing the different camera angles, even before in terms of artistic, how they're going to film the broadcast. But to get around that and to enforce the copyright, or to enforce the broadcast rights, UEFA, certainly in a UK case, relied on the copyright works which were within the broadcast. So we'll all see on football matches, major events, that at the very beginning of the broadcast, we call it the break bumper or the match bumper, where you see the official logo comes across with the official music, and then at each advertising break, you see it again, and then the sponsors might have their little piece. And those are very important for the rights holder to be able to then claim copyright ownership in the entire broadcast when it's infringed.
Thank you very much. A last question, and
a question to the entire panel. The different countries have ex officio and police competition on IP enforcement, and as events are typical something where enforcement in a very quick manner is needed, how would you see, or how is your experience in the police involvement, ex officio involvement, and countries that don't have it? Would you like to see more involvement of police? How does it work in your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. We obviously go physically to all of our events, so we see a lot of different countries, meet a lot of different authorities, work with a lot of different organizations when trying to do that work. And it is often with police, it's often with certain specific sections of it, or it might be a completely different authority completely. I guess all I can say is that one, it varies wildly. Even, for example, within the same country, we were in Portugal for the Nations League. We had 2 different venues in 2 different municipalities, and the procedural differences between those 2 municipalities, which were 25 minutes away from each other, was huge. And the organizations you were able to work with in those 2 municipalities were different. So both were good in their own ways, but the fact that you had a difference there shows you how much you need to prepare. We go at least twice to visit those authorities in the months leading up to an event, so that there's no shocks, no surprises about what those procedures are. So we try and create that collaboration where we can. For Euro 2020, which is going to be hosted in 12 different countries all at the same time, we're going significantly more than twice because that's going to be crazily complex. I would say in general, we have a very good experience with them, with the enforcement agencies we work with, but it takes commitment and time, which we're willing to do if they're willing to do it. I think speed is the key. To give a last point, it's all about how quickly can it get done. And if you get tied up for, as I say, hours and hours on one little case that occupies 4 police offices, that sort of ruins your day. So the best ones are those where it's quick, efficient, with a small number of people. That's when it works best.
something to add?
Just for us, the aim is always to destroy the counterfeit goods. So they're not anywhere. Staying in a warehouse does not help because maybe at some point they get out. The police authorities are very cooperative and they bring to our attention a lot of stuff. This is not the problem. The problem is what happens from there. When we find out that we have an infringement, we say, okay, this is an infringement, this is a counterfeit. What can we do? You have to file criminal proceedings, is the answer in most of the cases. And this, in some countries, can take up to 3 years. And if the party never appears, you don't know where the confiscated goods are, you don't know what happened with them. In the meantime, maybe the court, okay, maybe the court orders a destruction, but maybe there are countries that, okay, let's be honest, they're a bit corrupted, let's say, and you cannot know where the goods are. Maybe somebody put them in the market in the meantime. The most efficient way would be on-site to be able to prove that the goods have been destroyed. This would be, for me, the best solution because we know, okay, these goods will never enter the market. But this happens in very, very few jurisdictions worldwide. And this is the main problem for me.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much to the speakers, and have a nice day.